Something that's been discussed for quite some time now is that the NHL should have more awards to acknowledge defensemen, particularly defensive defensemen. This gained some steam recently after Jacob Slavin's performance at the Four Nations face-off, with many fans and analysts finally being aware of his brilliance on the defensive side, which surely had many Hurricanes fans in particular saying, clearly you haven't watched many or any Carolina games, but yeah, it was nice to see the broadcasts consistently highlighting the defensive play, and turning it into a big talking point of the tournament. Now, do individual awards really mean much in the grand scheme of things? Not necessarily, but they certainly seem to count whenever just about anyone goes over a player's accomplishments, particularly after their career is over. And of course, in general, it'd just be good for the league to showcase more of the sport's defensive aspects. So why not finally bring that acknowledgement to the NHL awards and add, like the Selke for forwards, at least one award for Best Defensive Defenseman? Many people say that the Norris has just become about offense in recent years. Well, while there have been recipients who were also competent on the defensive end, it kind of always has been primarily about offense. The Norris Trophy has been awarded since the 1953-54 season, where Red Kelly of the Detroit Red Wings was the first ever recipient. Red Kelly finished first in scoring by a defenseman. It's now been awarded 70 times, 33 times to the player with the most points amongst defensemen, and 55 times to someone in the top 3, while it's only gone to someone who finished outside the top 5 in points by a defenseman 10 times, and only 3 times to someone who finished outside the top 10. And of course, this award for Best Defenseman often gets handed out to players who don't even particularly excel on the defensive side of things. So yeah, I think it's time to acknowledge genuine defense. The Norris Trophy is awarded to whoever is seen as the best all-around defenseman, meaning offense and defense should be taken into account, as a goal prevented is as valuable as a point tallied. Nevertheless, it leaves voters to decide what they value more. And let's face it, it's a lot easier to quantify offensive numbers when you can just read them off of a stat sheet, and not many people, to say the least, are watching every game of multiple teams to get a good grasp of consistent defensive play. If the league did add at least one award that sheds light on the defensive side of the game that was completely irrelevant to tallying points, who should it be named after? It's kinda tough to name awards, though I think it's worth talking about the potential renaming of the Norris Trophy as well. So real quick, James Norris was a wealthy guy during the Great Depression. With his wealth, he arguably saved American hockey. He once had an ownership stake in 4 teams. The only franchise he was technically allowed to be officially named owner of was the Red Wings. So of course, he brought them to most prominent relevance, in large part by using his influence over the Rangers, Bruins, and Blackhawks to do so. He was the largest stockholder of Madison Square Garden, he supplemented the Bruins with consistent loans, and he owned Chicago Stadium. Back then, having money those teams needed basically gave him total control over those teams as well. He died in 1952, as obviously a very prominent figure in league history. And again, the James Norris Memorial Trophy was first awarded in the 1953-54 season. He was elected into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1958, and had a division named after him from 1974 to 1993. Now, many NHL awards are named after people who didn't play in the league, and many awards could be renamed if we're considering the naming an honor to the people they're named after, that is, as many weren't honorable people. Racism, for instance, was rampant, especially in the wealthy circles of the NHL back in the day, and unfortunately still could be now. Only most people have learned that they have to keep their terrible opinions and personalities private to keep their jobs. Good stuff. But if you do enough digging, or any basic research really, you'll probably find that many people who have awards named after them weren't good people, and in many ways weren't good for the league, let alone worthy of having awards named after them. Ted Lindsay and Doug Harvey were the first players to fight for minimum wages in the NHL, as well as pension plans, hospitalization benefits, and many other things, by forming the NHL Players Association to protect the players, most of whom had to work 2 jobs, didn't have anything higher than high school education, and after they stopped playing, had to live on whatever they were able to save. Forming the NHLPA was something they had an incredibly hard time fighting for, because people like Conn Smythe, Jack Adams, and before them, guess who? James Norris, opposed the idea of players having more rights every step of the way.
Jack Adams was going to have none of that, and he shipped Lindsay off to Chicago.
Going as far as to bench and demote any players who supported the association to the minors, lied about players' salaries, inflating them to newspapers, while lying about ownership revenue at the same time.
They're entitled to their opinion, but we did have a brain. We didn't want to hurt our game. We wanted to help our game.
Some people went as far as to make a pretty weak movie about the situation, but nevertheless attempted to tell the story. As with everything, there will be people who are reluctant to change for whatever reason, even though the change would be for someone who played in the league. For those, remember, the Ted Lindsay Award was the Lester B. Pearson Award until 2010. I don't recall any outcry over that change, and Lester B. Pearson wasn't against basic rights for NHL players due to his own financial interests. As nice as it can be to appreciate tradition in certain aspects, I'd argue that when you get down to it, the Ted Lindsay is one of the only awards worthy of keeping its name.
We were looking to improve hockey to the betterment of the game itself, but also to the players themselves.
I personally would like to see 3 awards exclusively for defensemen: Best Offensive, Best Defensive, and Best All-Around Defenseman. And obviously one player could win multiple or all 3 in the same season if they were deserving. As for the naming of any awards, defense or otherwise, I think it's a very tough thing to decide, especially if you're renaming something. All I really have is what I've seen on the ice and whatever well-documented information, statistical or otherwise, is available. So if I were to have a go at naming awards, and we're talking at least primarily about on-ice stuff, for Best Offensive Defenseman, how about Paul Coffey?
Arguably, he's probably the best offensive defenseman to have played the game.
He had a long and illustrious career and became one of the best defensemen to ever play the game, almost exclusively because of offense, finishing as the league's top-scoring defenseman 8 times and finishing in the top 5 13 times. He set an absurd amount of offensive records in the process, and along with his style of play, those records kind of speak for themselves in the context of this award being named after him.
Here's Coffey on a rush, right in, shoots, scores! 24-year-old Paul Coffey shatters Bobby Orr's record.
As for the Best Defensive Defenseman award, I'm sure many people would have a wide variety of different answers, but how about the guy who, for good reason, had one of the best nicknames in league history, the Secretary of Defense, Rod Langway.
The most dominating defensive player in the league.
The hardest guy ever to get around.
Despite having started his career and winning a Stanley Cup with the Montreal Canadiens, he's remembered by many for having drastically improved the Washington Capitals through defense. By the way, are those not some of the gnarliest shoulder pads ever? Anyway, as a franchise, they had never made the playoffs until Langway joined the team, and the Capitals made the playoffs every year for the rest of his career once he arrived.
Since coming over here, he has changed his club from mediocrity into a very tough contender.
In his first 2 seasons with the team, he became the only player to win the Norris while finishing lower than the top 10 in points by a defenseman, and is still the only recipient to finish outside of the top 12. Actually, he's the only one to finish outside of the top 15, 20, 30, or 40, and he did it twice, winning the Norris consecutively in the 1982-83 and 83-84 seasons, finishing 43rd in points by a defenseman both times, seasons where he had 32 and 33 points.
Langway taking out 2 Nordiques in the corner.
All things considered, the Langway Award for Best Defensive Defenseman seems like a good fit. And as for Best All-Around Defenseman, when it comes to racking up points and locking up the opponent's best forwards over a long period of time, how about Nicklas Lidstrom? He was in the top 10 amongst points by a defenseman in 15 out of his 20 seasons, leading the league 4 times, while simultaneously taking on the challenge of shutting down what are to this day some of, if not the best, most advanced players the sport has ever seen. Again, he also played those roles at the highest level for a ridiculous amount of time, and that shouldn't be counted out. Lidstrom was as durable as anyone. He played in 1,564, or 97.26%, of the Red Wings' 1,608 regular season games over the course of his career, along with 263, or 99.24% of their 265 playoff games. And he never missed the playoffs over his 20 seasons.
He was always outthinking the opposition.
I swear I've never seen him make a mistake.
The Lidstrom Award for Best All-Around Defenseman is pretty much the only way to go for me. Where's the guy, you ask? Well, I think availability, along with fantastic skills resulting in a large body of work, should be strongly considered. But if you want to argue peak over longevity, obviously Bobby Orr might be your choice here. Another option if you wanted to honor on-ice play as well as positive contributions to the sport would be the aforementioned Doug Harvey. But regardless of naming stuff, again, I just think it would be great for the sport to further acknowledge the less flashy aspects of the game. And of course, things like defensive zone starts, zone exits, and various penalty-killing metrics are being tracked in the public eye more efficiently than ever. So that stuff could assist award voters, along with hopefully just actually watching the games. Some would say the Selke could use an overhaul as well, as that award is now given exclusively to players with defensive prowess, who also put up a minimum of 20 goals and 40 points. Unofficially, of course, but at least in recent years, that's how it's gone. Unlike the Norris, the scoring requirements seemingly only really started being implemented at the start of the century. Sure, a lot of the time, top two-way players match up against top offensive players, and not that those players shouldn't win the Selke, that is one of the main reasons to get nominations, but at the same time, should there be a separate best two-way forward award? Again, one player could win both if they were deserving, but two-way forwards and forwards who are almost purely defensive could be acknowledged with different awards, because a lot of the time in other cases, the thankless shutdown job is given to players who excel particularly on the defensive side of things, and there are lots of forwards who are almost exclusively deployed in defensive situations to play exceptional defense, and as a result don't usually put up big offensive numbers, usually even racking up goals against because you can't stop everything if you're always put in situations where you're defending, thus making certain defensive stats look worse despite very high level defense. But anyway, what do you think of those award changes? Who would you name them after? Is there any other awards you'd like to see the NHL add, and who would you name those after?